disaster strikes, but it's also planning for all the sea levels rising and how it's going to affect the bases.
All those bases are at risk that are on our coast, and there's dozens of them.
Now, how is man-made climate change increasing security challenges in the Arctic, which we were addressing in the first half?
Well, I'll take that on for starters. You know, of course, now the Northwest Passage has opened up, and the good part, I guess, of that is China can get its goods to Europe with about 4,000 less miles to travel. The bad part is it's a gold rush. Everybody's diving up for the mineral rights, not the least of which are the oil companies, by the way. So there is an issue there associated with oil rights, and of course permafrost is melting, and that's contributing to the CO2 and ozone in the air. It's just a huge problem, and the military has looked at that as a significant protection issue, of course, for us. And who else is up there in terms of Russians, China, all other potential adversaries? These are all things we have to consider because of the polar ice cap melting.
Could I add one point to that? My views may be a little controversial on this, but I've looked very carefully at the technology of the very deep water drilling, and we all saw when the Macondo Deepwater Horizon well blew out in the Gulf of Mexico, the disaster that took place. What many are not as aware of is that there have been quite a few such blowouts and oil spills associated with deep water drilling.
Could you give us a few examples?
Brazil has had to deal with this, and there are others. And the technology is nowhere near as proven and as reliable as the conventional drilling, either on land or in shallow wells. Now, given that fact, the idea of rushing in to put in deep water oil wells in the Arctic Ocean, which is a closed ecosystem, pristine up until now, in an area where the recovery and the disaster and cleanup work is extremely difficult to deal with. I don't think it should be permitted, at least not until there were to be much greater confidence in the safety and reliability of these technologies. And by the way, the head of one of the biggest oil companies in the world, Total, took that position also. And many people in the industry are very queasy about moving into the Arctic Ocean.
And Eugene, does this concern you as a scientist as well?
Oh yeah, certainly. Like I said earlier, I think this is the climate story of the year in some way, is the rapid decline in the amount of Arctic sea ice. In 2007, the amount of sea ice before that, we'd say there was an average level, and in 2007 it really dropped dramatically. And many people in the scientific community were a little bit surprised at the 2007 levels. And in fact, some of the climate models had to be adjusted to try to take into consideration some of these feedbacks that are happening, that when you melt the sea ice, you have dark ocean underneath and things happening with water vapor as well. Then in 2012, it took another jump, almost the same kind of magnitude, that really surprised us again. Although there have been some scientists saying that they think we're going to see ice-free summers in the Arctic in the next decade or so, which we wouldn't have thought at all 10 years ago. So this, from a scientific perspective, is a dramatic change. And that's just what's happening in that local region. As I mentioned before, we expect that weather patterns are going to adjust as a result of that. And as an atmospheric scientist, I have to say, I'm a little, in some way, it's exciting because it's like a new experiment. But, of course, this is not the kind of experiment we want to do with our planet. I'd rather do it within a model.
100%, because this is going to affect all of us.
Right.
Now, General Cheney, climate deniers claim that we are not certain about what is happening to climate change. From a national security perspective, how important is certainty when it comes to strategic planning?
Well, I mentioned earlier that the Pentagon is great at planning, and indeed they are. And plan for the worst case, hope for the best. And the Vice President said, here, look at the QDR, and they've recognized that climate change is a problem, and they know it, and they know it. I'm not sure how much they understand it or how much planning they can do for it, i.e. predicting where the event is going to occur. But we know that long term we are the Earth is heating and it's causing climate change and it's causing instability, so they've got to try to predict where that instability is going to be. So indeed, it is a national security problem. But I just want to clamber on another point about drilling in the Arctic. We can drill away all we want. In the Wall Street Journal the other day, they said that we were going to overtake Saudi Arabia as the #1 producer of oil in a couple of years. We can still hardly even come close to slaking our current thirst for oil on 1 million barrels, on our barrels per day consumption here in this country. That is never going to be the solution to our problem, is drilling, drilling, drilling. It's not the answer. The answer is alternative energy. Finding other ways. It's using energy more efficiently. Finding ones that are less polluting is the true answer. So, and again, my organization says, yeah, you can go ahead and drill if you want. It's not going to fix this problem.
Let me address that question of certainty. Throughout the history of the United States, one of our greatest strengths has been our tradition of trying to seek out the best available evidence that pertains to problems or challenges that we face. Then we debate and have discourse among ourselves to test that evidence and challenge it. But when we reach a level of confidence that is beyond what a reasonable person would require, then we have had a tradition of acknowledging that we now have to deal with the reality described by the evidence that's been collected and challenged and tested and verified to the best of our ability. Where the climate crisis is concerned, every National Academy of Science on this planet agrees with the consensus. Their description of the evidence is that it is, in one word, indisputable. 97 to 98% of all the climate scientists most actively publishing in the world agree with the consensus. Every professional scientific society. The Pentagon, they're not known for encumbering their analyses with ideological and political flights of fancy. They're very professional, they look at the evidence, and they deal with what they find. Now let me draw an analogy. I saw on a television program this past week an interview with the leader of Iran, Ahmadinejad, and he was asked, Mr. Ahmadinejad, many Americans believe that you deny the existence of the Holocaust. Do you or do you not believe that the Holocaust existed? And his answer was, well, we need more research. We need to find more facts before we can reach that conclusion. Now, I'm not drawing an analogy to the Holocaust itself. The analogy I'm drawing is to a clear, historical, tragic, unbelievably horrific fact that has been established completely beyond any dispute whatsoever. And yet, there are still those who will say, we need more research. To use another example, for many years after the medical consensus was completely arrived at linking the smoking of cigarettes to lung cancer, the tobacco companies paid people to constantly challenge that consensus and say, well, we don't know for sure. It probably doesn't exist. And they had a stake in it. And many of the largest carbon polluters have a similar stake in pretending that the facts about the climate crisis are not adequately established.
No, this is very, very important to discuss. And now, joining us via Skype is Winjira Mathai. Sorry, it's via satellite, actually. She's from the Greenbelt Movement, and we're going to bring you into the conversation because we're very interested in finding out what is happening right now in Africa. How is all of this climate change impacting lives in Africa?
Well, thank you very much, and hello, good evening, everybody. It's evening here. I'm not sure what time it is for you. But, yeah, indeed, just listening in to the urgency of the conversation, the same conversation is going on across Africa, perhaps a little bit different in its focus on some of the ways that we can intervene right now, especially as concerns the work that we do at the Greenbelt Movement, the issue of deforestation. If I look at my own country, Kenya, the issue of deforestation is extremely critical. We know that, for example, the forestry is one of the cheapest ways that we can intervene and prevent what will be disproportionate danger for sub-Saharan Africa. So we've been promoting the reforestation, afforestation, and really the issue of avoiding deforestation. If I give you the example of Kenya, Kenya has about 2% and probably less forest cover. And with that 2% forest cover, that's the only guarantee we have for 75% of the water that we get, including for agriculture. Now, imagine for a minute that is interfered with. You can imagine the devastating effects on agriculture, on food production, and it spirals down. We have an incredibly sensitive, as you know, agriculture is extremely sensitive to degradation, and of course with that comes the changes in precipitation patterns. So in Africa it's extremely stark. We're talking about droughts that are getting worse, we're talking about declining food production and the pressures of agriculture, and then of course our declining forests and its impact on water supply. So very basic issues that have a lot and everything to do with survival.
Now, talking about survival, how is this impacting women on a day-to-day basis in Kenya? And in Africa, not only in Kenya, of course.
In Kenya especially, women are the ones who are responsible. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it can be applied for most of Africa, but at least in Kenya, women are disproportionately responsible for feeding the families. They're the ones who till the land, produce the food. They're the ones who are collecting water and going farther and farther for water as rivers and levels of rivers and wells go down. So the quality of life for these women is extremely difficult. They're seeing even this rainy season, which was the short rain,